Cool. So my name is Ives Van Hoorne, and this is a bit hard to pronounce. So you can also say Ives, Eves, Eve. I think Eve is more applicable here. My friends even call me Flip because Ives Van Hoorne is even hard in the Netherlands. I'm a part-time software developer at Kettewiki, which is an auction website, and I'm also a computer science student at the University of Twente, although I'm trying to. You can find me under the name CompuIves on social media. So, I released Code Sandbox last April, which is like 9 months ago. And before I'm going to talk about Code Sandbox, I want to tell you where it's coming from. So, around 2 years ago in the summer, we were on vacation to a little village called St. Ives. And coincidentally, my name is in it. At that time, we were working on converting our Rails 2 application to React for Kettewiki. And I didn't have my MacBook with me. And I was on a team of converting it with some other developers. And the developers kept asking me questions about React or about implementing React in Rails. And I didn't have any clue what they were asking because I didn't have any editor to execute it on. So I got their code and I had to run it through the interpreter in my head. And then I had to give them answers based on my broken interpreter. So that's when I started thinking, what if I put my local editor in the browser? And I kept having this idea, but I didn't do anything with it. I started studying, and I still didn't do anything with the idea. But then I started getting lectures, and I started to notice how boring lectures can be. So at that point, I started thinking, when the Java lecture started, I started thinking, okay, now I have to do something with this. And I started building, and it got out of hand. And in April, we deployed Code Sandbox. How many of you have heard about Code Sandbox before? Whoa, that is so cool. That's really cool. I didn't expect so many hands. Okay, so Code Sandbox is an online web application editor. It still sounds a bit fake, so I can just show you with this magic trick. Can I make it bigger, maybe? So this is Code Sandbox. And as you can see, it looks a bit like your local editor. You have the code on the left, you have the preview on the right, and you have files here. And the new thing about Code Sandbox, well, not new, but the other thing is you have this preview here. And if you start editing here, then you can see that it updates. And also with other files. You can even use dependencies. So the idea is that you can just import any React project, or yeah, we also support some other frameworks, Preact, Vue, or Svelte, and that you can just start working on it. And that would solve my problem. For example, if you're at your grandma's house, then you can still see projects from others, and you can just share your URL with others. So, how does it work? This whole application is written in React, but you're actually looking at two applications. You're looking at the sandbox, that's this yellow party, and you have the editor, which is React, and the sandbox is not React. Now, we have a separate application on the right side, the preview, because we don't want to pollute the user code with our own globals. And there's another reason. If we execute the code, then there could be an attacker that has, for example, code to read all cookies of codesandbox.io and send it to the attacker. And we don't want that to happen. So we execute the code on a subdomain, as you can see here. This is the subdomain for this sandbox. And if you can even open it in a different window, and you can see that it's a separate application. So the attacker can only read the cookies of this subdomain. Now, when you start editing code, we send the code to the preview. We evaluate the code and transpile it. And then we send error info back. So actually, that's the whole idea behind Code Sandbox. It's just a fancy transpiler and evaluator. In the sandbox, when we get the code, we first get a delta. So we check which files have changed. Then we transpile those files. And we do this using web workers, so it all happens in parallel. And this part, the transpile, is asynchronous. Because in some cases, we don't have all the files yet. For example, with dependencies, we don't have all the files in memory. You know how big node modules can be. That can be like 700 megabytes, and we don't have 700 megabytes to store in memory. So we load them on the fly. So that's why transpilation is asynchronous, so we can still download. And then we evaluate the entry file, and that's all there is to it. There is also a bit of code. I just put this code here because we use most of this code in Code Sandbox, and this is just all the code we need to evaluate a file with import support. So I recommend everyone to just start building their own bundler because it's easier than expected. In Code Sandbox, we have this mentality that UI is more important than code. Humans are visually focused. If you tell someone how big the difference is between 400 megabytes and 600 megabytes, it takes longer than if you just show them an image like a bubble of 400 megabytes relative to a bubble of 600 megabytes. So that's why with Code Sandbox, we always do everything with a UI, and we try to get the best developer experience by just showing a UI. Another great example of this is Webpack Dashboard. Webpack Dashboard is just a wrapper around Webpack. But the cool thing about Webpack Dashboard is that it shows you, for example, the modules. Can I zoom? Oh no, that's too hard. Well, you can see here that you have like lines, and the bigger the line is, the bigger the module is. And you can just see in a quick glance what the biggest dependencies are in your project. Another cool example is Visceral by the engineers of Netflix. They have written a UI, a GUI, I think, to show all the servers that they have with the traffic that flows between the servers. And this is very cool because you can just see in a quick glance which servers there are, what the servers do, and you can also see live, for example, if a server goes down, you can see live the rerouting of all the traffic to the different servers. That's really interesting. It's something I think we can improve on UI tools a lot more. I mean, most of us are front-end developers, and we're writing terminal scripts. I think we can do better. With Code Sandbox, we do something similar. We try to do everything in a UI as well. So, for example, we are in the unique situation that we have control of all the files, we have control of the whole code editor, and we have control of the preview. So we can detect errors and we can show suggestions. So if I, for example, make an import with one hand, this is called fast typing. I had my left wrist broken for some time, so I'm now a pro in one-hand typing. But if you import styled components, we detect that styled components is not yet in the dependency list. And we can actually show it to the user. Could not find dependency styled components. And then you have the suggestion here to add it as a dependency. And if you click it, it's added. Woo! So that's another example of using UI, more UI than code. And especially in the front-end world where you have 2,000 configuration files, it's a breath of fresh air to have like a UI to configure everything. Now, how did Algolia come into the picture of Code Sandbox? Well, I think in around June, I wanted to give the user the option to search for sandboxes. Because at that time, we had like 20,000 sandboxes, and I was thinking, this is like a goldmine of information. For example, if you ever need an example of how React Router DOM is used, then you can just filter on that dependency and see all sandboxes there. Maybe a more applicable example is if we want to see examples with React InstantSearch, then we can just filter on all sandboxes with that dependency. And we can add more dependencies. For example, let's add Glamour as well. So now we have, hey, I know this guy. Now we have autocomplete with built with Glamour and React InstantSearch. So that's when I started implementing Algolia, and I set out 7 days to build it, but it took me 1 day. It went much quicker than I expected. It's especially the front end. It was actually how React is envisioned, that you just drop in some components and it magically works. Well, not magically, but it works. So this list is just a component. These filters are components, and this search bar is a component, and woof, it worked. That's real magic. The other thing that surprised me was the search speed. I normally get results in 2 milliseconds, and that feels impossible. So I was generally impressed with Algolia, and I thought maybe we can use this to improve the developer experience more. So we started implementing Algolia for this. So you have this dependencies UI, and you can add a dependency by writing a package name and then writing a version, and then click on add package. But this caused some confusion because we would have typos or wrong dependencies installed because users didn't know the dependency name correctly, or they didn't know which version to install. And then they generally just had to Google it, the dependency, and check if it's the right one. So we implemented Algolia with this, with the yarn index. And now you have, I can actually demo it. I'm a big fan of demoing. So when you click add package, you get this new thing. And you can start searching for your package. And then you see a list of all dependencies that fit with this keyword, with their license, with their description, owner, all the dependency versions. I'm a big fan of this feature. And you can also search for other sandboxes or the homepage. So this is already a big improvement for the UI. And this is also a good example of using UI to improve the developer experience. Now, when we implemented this, I thought, what can we do more with this instant search? Because this is a special kind of instant search. It's like, I've seen searches before that take 300 milliseconds, but this search has always been, for me, under the 55 milliseconds. So you can use it for a lot of different things where you need like real-time results. So the next thing that I saw was doc search by Algolia. And the idea is that you can give your documentation to Algolia, and they will like crawl the whole documentation, generate an index, and then you can use their search for your documentation. So then you instantly have a search for your documentation. And this is already used by more than 350 different documentations. And React, for example, and React Native also use it. So this is like a goldmine of information. We have documentation for like probably more than 200 different libraries. So I have to give a disclaimer now. I haven't implemented any of this, what I'm going to show you, and I'm also not sure if it's possible to implement this. But I want to implement this. So this would be one of my cool dreams. Can I zoom? I really need to zoom for this one. Oh. Yeah. Okay. So what if you could just press a button and we detect which libraries are installed, and we link the libraries to their documentation counterparts. So, for example, we detect that you have a file open that imports React. If you now press a button and get this search, and that you can just search for documentation of the library you're currently working with, and then get this cool list of, oh, how did component.mount work? And then you can just click on it and it will open another documentation. That's a very good example of using Algolia to improve developer experience. And you can also use this in other cases. For example, if an error is thrown, in the error overlay, we could do a quick search on Algolia, check if it's in the documentation listed, and then we can say to the user, oh yeah, we saw that this error is a known error, and you can find more info in the documentation here. Also a good example of it. Now, I am not done with, where's the full screen? Oh, I should never have done this. Oh, no, it's small screen. Oh, it's okay. I can zoom. These are like hacks. I'm a script kiddie. Okay, so so I noticed that with Algolia we have like 55 milliseconds of response time, and we show an autocompletion in the editor after 500 milliseconds of no typing. So we're still far under the list of autocompletions. We can actually use this. So, for example, Babel is also in the documentation. We could use the documentation again to generate autocompletions. We could mark in, Babel could mark in the headers of the documentation like this is autocomplete enabled, for example. And we can use that to generate autocompletions here. And this can go even further. We can also do something that is like extreme. We could build a index builder, and then we could take all, for example, definitely typed type listings and put this in one big index. So you have all TypeScript typings in one index. And then you could put that in the autocomplete as well, and then you would be able to use typings for every library instantly. But this is like the most crazy idea I've had, and I'm not sure if this is possible, if this is feasible, if this is smart. But I've started to think about autocompletions as a very smart way of searching, and I think that we could use Algolia for it as well. How much time do I have left? 4 minutes. Okay, then I can still show you the code, because I want to show you how it actually works. So if you evaluate, this is when we want to evaluate code. What we actually do is we stub a require function right here, and we resolve the path because we get a relative path, and we get an absolute path from this. Then we check the code, and then we recursively evaluate it again. Now, we actually, when we evaluate the code, we call this function. And what it does is, it wraps all this code in another function, and it does this dirty eval that that I feel very bad for writing it. And we get a function back, and we just give that function these parameters: require, module, and exports. And the way the code is executed, module.exports get filled, and we just return the module exports. And that's all there is to it. This bundler is in Code Sandbox since the beginning of time of Code Sandbox, which is like a year ago, and it hasn't changed that much. That's all I have. Thank you for listening, and thank you. I can take questions, right?
Yeah. Any question? Anyone has a question? Come on.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy. So I have one. You've been saying we implemented this and we implemented this, but how many are you in your team for doing Code Sandbox?
Oh, like I work on it on my own, and we have now 41 contributors. We're completely open source, so if you ever want to check the code or want to work on the code, it's linked on the homepage of Code Sandbox.
Thank you. That's incredible.
Any other questions?
Come on, I wanna throw the catchbox. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Do you execute code on server side? I think about Webpack or
No, it's all client side. So Code Sandbox also works offline. It's a service worker. So you can so if you ever go offline, then you can still execute the code, and there's no server side in it right now. But we're actually thinking of writing a server side module to play with it. But everything is client side right now.
you don't have issues with some build tools that require to run on Node or something like this?
Yeah, we actually do. For example, I'd love to implement Next and Gatsby, but they are relying pretty much on Node. And that's why server-side is an interesting thing to implement. But right now, Code Sandbox has mocked almost every Node API except for 5 other APIs. So we, for example, have FS, and we have child process. Those kind of Node modules are mocked. So most Node applications work inside the browser right now.
Okay, thanks.